We know now that our technology and our devices can fail, and that could be problematic, especially if we have some sensitive data on these different drives, or perhaps maybe the drive doesn't fail, but somebody deletes data that they shouldn't have deleted, and we need to retrieve that. Well, that's where backup comes into play. Backup is a way that we can have a copy of the data that we have on these different devices. So if anything were to ever happen to it, we could do a restore and be back up and running. So let's talk about data backup. Backup is grabbing a copy of our data and hopefully storing that backup copy on some other device. Maybe it's in the cloud, maybe it's in some sort of removable media, maybe it's in another disk drive somewhere else. So grabbing a copy of it. One of the keys to backup is that it comes from a specific date and time that we do that backup. That is, this data is constantly changing on the source, but data that we backed up comes from a specific date and time that we can fall back on. One of the considerations we have is, what do we back up? We could back up a whole machine and all the data and everything on it. Or maybe we just back up one of the disks or volumes on it. Or perhaps we're just backing up a folder or a file that's on that. And depending on what we choose, they all have their pros and cons. For instance, obviously a file is much smaller and we don't have to have a big backup storage of it. However, if we need to replace the whole machine, it could be much more in depth into trying to set up the machine to access that file again. However, if we restore the whole machine just to access the file, that could also take a lot of time to do. So depending on what we're trying to accomplish, we would back up different elements of our data. There are different types of backups. So if we were backing up, let's say, a volume, if we were to do a full backup, it would back up everything on that volume. However, we could choose a differential backup. A differential backup is going to back up everything from the last full backup. If we are going to do an incremental backup, it's going to back up everything from either the last full backup or the last incremental backup, whichever one was last. You can look at it this way. Let's say we had a full backup done at the beginning of a day, and then changes happen throughout the day. A differential would take up everything. So let's say we did one right here. It would do everything from the last full. Same thing, if maybe we do another backup right here, it'd do everything from the last full. If we did it right here, everything from the last full. Versus an incremental, if we did it in those same time frames, would do everything since the last backup, like that. The advantages and disadvantages of each of these is how long each one of these backups take and how much a restore. Restore is when we're going to restore the data and all the changes. A full backup would have to be restored plus whatever incremental or differential is needed. And what that process looks like is going to depend on the type of backups. The biggest thing is to analyze what data you have and what you're trying to achieve, and make sure you plan accordingly. You want to make sure that you have backups done ahead of time and don't get caught where you're losing data that you wanted to have because you failed to plan for a proper backup solution.